All right, we are live. It's Wednesday. I'm April Zabral. I'm back with The Positive Effect. And this week, I'm so excited to have Dean Correia back on the show.
Hi, April. How are you? So excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. So if you haven't joined us before, put your name in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. And if you're coming back, welcome. You can always now subscribe as well on Apple Podcasts and Spotify because it gets downloaded into a podcast so you can listen along after and share with your retail friends. But I'm excited to have you on today, Dean, because, we haven't had you on for a while. The landscape has changed in your world of retail. And so if you want to introduce who you are, what you do, so everybody that's listening and finds this knows what you do. And then we're just going to jump into an awesome conversation about what's happening in your world in retail.
Terrific. Thanks for that. So my name is Dean Correia. I'm based in the Toronto area. My background is 20 years of operations and corporate security with Gap, Starbucks, and Walmart, 4 years in operations with the Gap when we first came to Eastern Canada, and then 13 with Starbucks, where I had the privilege of being a store manager for a year and then leading their security function in Canada and Latin America for 12, and then 3 years with Walmart as their director of corporate security for Canada. And I've been on my own as an independent security consultant since 2011.
Well, congratulations, first of all, for being on your own from 2011, because that's a huge accomplishment in the world that we live in of self-employment. So, and you've got an impressive background, and you are the author of the course that I posted underneath this post that's on retailu, which is getting really, really good feedback from clients, that it's really helping their teams learn, get educated, because that's one of the things I think that's always missing in security in retail is the education piece of why it's so important. So we'll jump into that in a bit, but what are you seeing in terms of the security landscape change since the pandemic happened?
Yeah, great question. I'd say, with my clients, two main things: the rise of the Security Operations Center, so a central intelligence hub to monitor all varieties of risk across the enterprise. So social media monitoring, weather risk, travel, supply chain, incident reporting, access control. The companies that really were successful during COVID brought that intelligence in and then delivered those risks proactively in advance to the business to mitigate them. And then number two is the work from home risk. And I deal with this almost every day. So how do I know that April Sabral is April Sabral? How do I what kind of background checking am I doing? And how do I know that you're not stealing proprietary information? And one of my clients is a retailer along the east coast of the U.S., and they used to have this Fort Knox type of floor on their building where they used to do all their designs and drawings and cut their swatches. Now they're sending all that out. Ooh. So how do I make sure that package arrives on the doorstep and doesn't get picked off by a competitor? And even violence. If my company mandated me to be home at an office and my spouse gets tired of me working 15, 16 hours a week and there's some sort of physical altercation, is that workplace violence or is that domestic violence? So all these new wrinkles about duty of care and staying engaged with people, because there aren't those water cooler type of conversations as much, really has challenged me and stretched me to think of different programs and tactics to help mitigate those risks. And then, if something happens, deal with it in a proactive way. Even something is conducting an investigation. If I have a concern that you violated a policy, how do I do that virtually? Because I don't think you're coming into the office very quickly to talk to me. Like in the good old days, I could just knock on your office. So 100%. Stuff like that. It's really, really interesting.
Oh, wow. And so when you're seeing all of these changes, do you think that, and I talk retail, but it could be any of your clients really, but specifically because this is a retail audience that joins the conversation, do you think retailers are actually looking at that as part of their strategy and assessing that? Because I don't hear that being talked about with my clients. And I'm not in the security world, but I'm definitely in store operations.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's still reactive. And what I talk to my clients about and even some prospects is one of my first questions is, do you think your program is defensible post-incident? If you have a theft or a workplace violence situation, or even worse, a death, can you stand? Is your program defensible to you yourself as a human being, to your staff, to your shareholders, to everyone you care and love? Would you want your loved ones working in that store? That's the first type of question and conversation I think leaders should have with themselves. And you can't mitigate every risk. If somebody wakes up today and decides to do something at a store or at a headquarters. They might, but it's important to you being able to confidently say my program is defensible because we had these risk mitigation controls in place. And I've been involved in 3 workplace murders, and it's very, very tough situation. When you get put on the stand, you're going to get asked, what did you know, when did you know it, and what did you do about it? And you really have to have strong answers, just ethically and morally, because your people are your number one asset, obviously, but also from a defensibility point of view.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that's a great question to ask if you're in a leadership meeting, for sure. So people being the number one asset, there's all of this recruitment problems right now. I think it's, going into holiday when everybody starts hiring, there's less staff on the floor. What does that create in terms of risk? Because we've always had risk in terms of people stealing, but I just think about the inflation and everything that's happened in the last couple of years, but retail wages have not caught up to that. So what does that create then?
Yeah, I think a lack of engagement sometimes makes great people make bad decisions. Food inflation, your significant other lost their job. You have to put food on the table. So some people are making bad decisions at work they wouldn't normally make. A, to pay their bills, and B, due to a lack of engagement, they don't feel the company cares.
Right.
In this hybrid model, how do you stay engaged? How do you check engagement? How do you check in with them and make sure that if they have any issues or concerns, that you're on top of it as a leader? And I think that that's one of the main areas. I also think from a staffing point of view, we're forgetting that COVID, a lot of people died during COVID. I listened to a podcast the other day, and during the 10 years of the Vietnam War, 58,000 millennial aged people died. In 1 year in the US, 61,000 millennial aged people died.
Wow.
So and how prepared are we as a retail industry to factor that in? Yes, they've gone to other jobs because we furloughed them or laid them off or we shut our stores. There's no doubt about it. But there's all this, new dynamic with talent. And, if the workplace isn't perceived to be safe, talented people aren't coming, and their loved ones are going to tell them not to go. Regardless of how great the brand is, if it's not safe, they're not working there.
Oh yeah, my son, I got a good story about him. I always got stories about my kids on this show. They probably hate me sharing stories, but he's 18, right? And he was working in a Burger King, part-time job, like young people, 18 years old, first job, most of us did that. And he was working in a store next to the head office, and it was great, and felt safe, and people from the office. And then they moved him to a store in the middle of not a great place with no staff. He's like, Mom, there was 2 of us, me and another 18-year-old, running a store at 1 o'clock in the morning. He's like, I quit. He's like, I'm not going to do it. I don't feel safe. But then everybody's complaining about how, you can't find staff. So it's security and making people feel safe is such a huge part of creating a good work experience. But we don't ever talk about that.
Yeah, you get the results you deserve in life. Right. So 80% of robberies happen in the first half an hour of the day and the last half an hour of the day. I'm going to rob you in the first half an hour so I can get all of yesterday's money. And I'm going to rob you the last half an hour of today so I can get all of today's money. Makes complete sense. I'm a business person. Yet when is staffing the least? First half an hour and last. I mean, they're not they pick their targets for a reason. They pick the soft target. And they know that when the stores have one opener or one closer and how busy it is, and they usually case the store, well in advance. But they're business people. They're typically not going to rob you at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They're typically not.
But then, what coaching do you do to try and help your clients, especially these retail clients, open their eyes to see something different? Because one of the things I face is well, what's the ROI? What's the impact on this? What are the results? And I'm like, okay, if you don't know the results of leadership training and management training by now, I don't know what to tell you, because everybody works for people, right? But how do you convince them of that then? If somebody's listening to this and they're going, God, he's right. What would you coach them on?
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach. I think, what are your policy procedures first and foremost? What are your expectations? What's your staffing like? How are you getting, how soft or hard of a target are you? Do you go to the bank one day a month, or do you go to the bank every day? Do you have cameras? Okay, good. Are they working? I'm not sure. Stuff like that. So it's a blend of people, processes, and technology, and then all that has to be combined with incident reporting. One of my biggest frustrations in retail is the lack of incident reporting. Every leader that's listening to this should ask their store teams, how many times were you afraid for your safety in the last month? And how many times did you complete an incident report? If you're not getting any incident reports, for 2 months, 3 months, they're not telling you stuff's happening, because that way you can make a database decision. Your store security profile should not be the same in every store across the land, because the risks are different. To operate in Seattle or San Francisco or Toronto is very different than in Brandon, Manitoba, or Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Very different. And your security should be different. Your people should, as you and I know, if you're working at the Eaton Center in Toronto, you're a really special kind of person. You can handle the Eaton Center. Well, it's true.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that with security?
I don't know. It's like we take a blanket approach, and in all of my experience anyway, if we took an approach, that's the other piece of it. It's like we didn't have everywhere. Like the last retailer I worked for, we didn't really have security in place, and we were like, oh no, they're really nice people. They're not taking anything. Like, not going to happen. And like, we weren't really counting things, so we didn't really understand the training. But I can bet that they were losing money left, right, and center. And then, you wonder why you can't increase wages, because it's just going out the door.
Yeah.
But you could be keeping it and pushing it into investing in your people.
Yeah, that is my second biggest frustration, is I still think people are not proactively managing shrink well enough. The National Retail Federation came out with their survey recently, and on an average, every retailer in North America loses about 1.4% of their total sales every year.
What?
So if your shrink is $50,000 in your store and your margin is 20%, you have to sell $250,000 of goods to make that $50,000 back. Think about the effort that it takes to put $250,000 of sales through the register, and you're getting zero. I was with a client in July, just sitting around, and we're doing an assessment of his grocery distribution center. And this gentleman walks out in this freezer suit. It's the middle of July. And he comes out for his cigarette break, and he's having a cigarette in the parking lot. And I look at it and I think, well, that's weird, don't need to know the person's name, but it's like, oh yeah, that's Fred. And he's been with the company for 15 years. I said, nobody has a cigarette in the middle of July in a freezer suit in the parking lot. You may want to look into that. So they look into it. 15 ribeye steaks underneath his freezer suit.
Oh my God.
And he's been working there a long time.
Wow.
So, and there's a whole bunch of reasons behind that, but you have to, so some shrink's controllable is my point, and some's not. And it's a real hit to your bottom line. And again, what I think works is you need to translate what's the incentive to manage shrink. So people need to understand that, you base your store hours based on projected store sales. So the more profitability, the more store sales, the more hours, which means more cash in your pocket, so that you have the whole eyes of the store looking and monitoring shrink and incidents and, all risk on a daily basis.
So, you stand, that's like, oh my Lord. I mean, I've had so many experiences like that, but that is a typical, it's like, oh no, that person's worked here so long, they're my best employee. So how do we take those rosy colored glasses off, leaders, so that we actually see what you see? Because your first response was, that's a little bit strange, which when you say it, by the way, it sounds very obvious. Like, yeah, why wouldn't you think that was strange? But like, how do we take those rosy colored glasses off?
I think you need to talk about it. I think we talk about sales and operations and cost of goods and outages on the shelf, but we don't talk about incidents, or we don't talk about investigations. So, at Gap, Starbucks, and Walmart, my teams used to publicize to the right audience in a respectful way when we had significant investigations enterprise-wide. So you had somebody in Vancouver, a DM in Vancouver, whose light bulb would go on, well, I have something similar happening in my store. And then from an incident reporting point of view, as opposed to, it's just, you have to deputize everybody with security principles. Just like everyone's an operator and a recruiter in retail.
Right.
Deputize all of them and just report anything that causes you fear or concern. That's the simple answer. People always ask me, what do I report? Anything that causes you fear or concern. And you're not going to rush to judgment, because, I don't want to talk badly about April. You're not talking badly about April. You're just reporting something that causes you fear or concern, because I think we all have a duty of care to each other, to our communities, right? So if something happens at work, what really gets my back up is there's all these signs that we missed, whether it's a theft or workplace violence or something even more serious. Usually my experience is people don't go from zero to being irrational and nothing in between. They don't go,
Right.
they don't steal 5 deposits right off the bat. They just don't. They steal $10, $20, 2 pairs of jeans, and then see if anybody's going to notice. Same
Right.
sort of idea. I've never got any pride from a $200,000 investigation because we should have caught it when it was $2,000.
Oh, 100%. And, just putting my operator's hat on and back in that seat, sometimes it's like, yeah, it's just not a topic of conversation and it's not a focus, and it should be part of that conversation. However, if you don't have a leader in your business that's owning that, let's say there's a lot of people out there that do not have a loss prevention security department, right? Who owns that in the business if you don't have that then?
So you know what helps? I think that you need to lead. You need to, when it's uncomfortable, you need to lean into it, and you need to lead, and you need to educate. Just as I want to learn more about IT or HR, I think you need to be a little bit of a generalist. But what also has helped a lot of clients that I think are winning in the loss prevention game is they're cross-pollinating. So if I'm an operator and I'm recruiting for somebody, I'm going to look at LP because I want somebody with an LP background in my operations team and spreading those learnings and those principles. And same thing if I'm in loss prevention or asset protection, I'm going to recruit from operations because they know the business, right? And you got to be out there. I think you've got to be out there. You've got to go to huddles. You've got to tour it at open and close and do a ride along with your logistics team and learn the business and then adapt security principles to it. Know how your company makes money, delivers their services, and then adapt the security principles. So become a business enabler with the security expertise. And then I think you'll start to win.
That's such good advice. Like, honestly, if I was working in a retail, I'd be going back and listening to this and taking a whole load of notes of like questions I would want to ask and stuff, because it is a very important topic, and especially now with psychological safety. I like what you said about like incident reports when you're not feeling safe, because, for me, people always ask me, what's the difference in leadership now post pandemic? And I'm like, well, to me, it's the same thing. It's always been make people feel good about where they work, make them feel engaged, and like make them feel safe, which comes back to me as a leader. How do I do that? Right. So, and that has not changed. However, people's circumstances have changed. And also we talked about earlier before we got on the show of how they were treated by the company through the pandemic could have taken an engaged person and then disengaged them, which is that quiet quitting term, which I just call it like we were saying, just a disengaged person.
Yeah.
Which then causes a whole lot of problems, right? So
people remember how you treat them, right? During the beginning of the pandemic, people will remember how you treated them and want to come back or not. And every engagement survey, in my opinion, should have one question: do you feel safe at work included? That's all you need. That's all you need. And people, as you and I know, people will tell you.
Yeah.
People will tell you. So do you feel safe at work? Bake it into your engagement process, and you'll find out about all kinds of things. And it's probably part of your diligence, part of your defensibility, right? Because if you do have a serious incident in the workplace, trust me, everything is discoverable. Everything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just think that more people need to take your course, first of all, because I think the course is really, really good. And it teaches, especially if you do have a program, but if you don't have a program, these 3 courses can really help you kind of get that conversation going, because it's for all the operations teams to go through it. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest risk or mistake people could be, I don't know, not thinking about going into 2023 in a strategy?
Yeah, I think it's workplace violence. I think, if you look at crime landscape in North America, I just heard that a major pharmaceutical retailer, the CEO is seriously considering locking everything up in the stores, everything, behind a cabinet, behind some sort of glass partition, everything. And I'm sure they'll do the math and see what the ROI is. But I think that, part of the reason, a portion of the reason that people are short-staffed, is because people don't feel safe. And you could put 5 security guards at the front door and they're still not going to feel safe. So you've got to really look at your assortment and look at who you're hiring, because as we talked about earlier, the people working at the corner of Main and Main have a different skill set than the people working not at Main and Main.
Right.
So I think you really need to think about, it's always a risk to people is the number one risk that I've been talking about and concerned about for 25 years, because people, especially in retail, make or break your business. So I think workplace violence and general safety will continue to be prevalent. And if you can make people feel safe, they'll come to work on time, put in the effort, report if something's not safe, and then all kinds of strategy, because you need to have a data-based strategy. You can't just be on intuition, and part of the data will come from those incident reports.
Yeah. Another story, like there's these stories I hear all the time, I'm sure like you do, from friends and clients, but like a friend of mine, her daughter, applied for a job, went through the onboarding process. There were 6 of them that got hired for holidays. And after the first day of being there through onboarding, they didn't go back to work, 6 of them. Now they're all under 20, they're all under 25. So young people, again, going into the workplace, but they just didn't feel comfortable with the manager that was training them or the processes and policies that were in place. So 6 of them got hired, went to an onboarding, didn't show back up the next day.
Yeah. And I wonder if that company followed up to find
well,
out.
that was my thing. I was like, that kills me, because if that was one of my stores and my team, I'd be like, what the heck is going on? Like, there's got to be something wrong with that store, something that's going on in that store. And that's the other thing. Like, are leaders really in the building as much as they used to be?
I definitely think it's up to us in 2023 from a safety and security standpoint, because the police are strapped, their resources are constrained, their response time is not what it used to be for a whole bunch of reasons. And we need to really be self-sufficient, again, from a people, process, and technology point of view.
When I've been in stores as well, visiting stores this year, and just in contracts with clients and stuff, and like the store teams are like, I want security tags. Like, people are just walking out with things, and then it's like, oh, well, do I take the hit on the shrink, or do I invest in systems and processes? Do you think those things make an actual difference, or do you think it's more about staffing on the floor?
I think it's, again, people, process, and technology. But before anyone implements anything new, I always challenge them: are you 100% confident that you're maximizing what you currently have in place?
Right.
Your technology, your processes, and your people. Why are you introducing more complexity? Because your stores are already busy enough. Your staff's already, flat out. Why introduce any more complexity? They need to be able to deliver to the customer more effectively. And if you're going to implement something better, that's great. But it needs to really simplify their lives and not complicate it. And they need to understand what's in it for them.
If a business right now is trying to make a decision on headcount, because I'm sure, like, we've heard like a lot of people being laid off in the last month in specific brands, a lot of people, and they're making a decision on headcount for 2023 and maybe adding or losing or whatever. What do you want to say to those retailers that are considering like headcount and adding or losing when it comes to security?
Yeah, I think that you need to set your people up for success from day one of enrollment, and talk to them about safety and security. And the one principle to really stress with them is incident reporting. How do they do it? When do they do it? Why do they do it? And I think that you'll find that you'll get a lot of great information. Sam Moulton used to always say, you don't need these fancy surveys. Just talk to your employees and talk to your customers, and they'll tell you everything.
It's so true. It's so true.
Right? So in terms of headcount, again, maximize the teams that you have there. What are their concerns? Are you giving them the vehicle, that whether it's a virtual Zoom or some sort of in-person town hall or some Survey Monkey, whatever it is, to tell you what's happening and what's concerning them? So by the time a significant incident happens, you shouldn't be blindsided. It's like an annual performance review. Right. If you're blindsided by an annual performance review, you didn't do your job for the last 11 months and 29 days.
Yeah. And how do you keep those leaders motivated to keep fighting the fight that are the security and safety leaders in the business when they feel like they're just getting beat down? Because like, I've seen that this year as well. They're like, I know the issues, and I'm just getting so like beat down because nobody's hearing what I'm saying. So how do you keep those people engaged and motivated to keep fighting the fight?
I think it's got to be a constant topic, whether you have a newsletter or a quarterly meeting or whatever metrics dashboard that you present. What kind of security metrics are you reporting? As a leadership team, because you should be, right? And I also think that there's an opportunity for stronger leadership courage to get involved and take care of your people, and just ask them, just really ask them. But I think, if you're a security leader out there and you're listening to this and you have the leadership courage to ask, the VP of Ops or HR or supply chain, ask them for their annual goals and performance objectives. and look at the sheet and say to them, I can help you with 2 of these. You end up helping them make bonus, you'll have a raving fans all over the place, and they'll be your biggest partner and biggest advocate for the rest of your career. Because again, there's a quantitative benefit to reducing shrink, right? Shrink goes down, sales go up, speed of service at the register goes up, because if you take somebody out of a store for theft, then now those sales are getting properly recorded.
Right. So, and also the sizes are not available when it's stolen, right? Like when it walks out the door. I've never had a safety security person, loss prevention person actually ask me that question when I was a head of sales. That's a brilliant question, because if somebody had walked over to me and had the courage to actually, or like maybe it's not courage, maybe they just don't know.
Right.
That's a good question. So if you're watching, this is what I love about this show, because whenever you guys come on, you like drop these gems of wisdom, and people walk away with they always message me and say, that really helped me when I went to work next week. I applied what that person shared and it made a difference. So I think, because if somebody had walked up to me and asked me that question, I would have looked at it very differently.
Right. Like voids, for example, right? In retail, they're typically an indication of theft. Yeah. However, maybe it's a training issue. Yeah. So if your loss prevention team helps reduce voids, that increases speed of service, which gets more customers through the line. Bonus.
Right. 100%. Yeah. Because we're all trying to make more sales. That's what everybody's doing in retail every day, trying to make more sales. So
exactly.
Oh, Dean, this was such a golden conversation. It's like words of wisdom. Like, honestly, there's so many gems, people that can take away from this. I'm so happy that we had you back on the show. We're coming up on time. It always goes really fast. So what's the last piece of, words of wisdom, best pieces of advice that you want to leave with that maybe we didn't talk about today?
Yeah, just the one piece is make sure your stores are reporting their incidents. Make sure the stores are reporting what's causing them any sort of fear or concern every day, and talk about it openly, because what's happening in store 1 is probably happening in store 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And you want to be able, and from a violence point of view, people usually build up to a violent act, and they don't just all of a sudden go from calm to irrational. So just check in with your teams, and make sure that your incident reporting matches your volume.
Really good advice. How can people get hold of you?
They can get a hold of me on LinkedIn. Would love to have a conversation and connect that way. And like you said, I have a robbery prevention, workplace violence management, and shrink training course on retailu. And thank you for your continued partnership, and your energy and bringing these types of informative sessions to the world. I appreciate it.
We need to have these discussions more, that's for sure. I think, just so we can get training, education, like you said, and just keep doing the good work, because there's so many great people that work in our industry that need protecting and need to feel safe. I think that's a big takeaway for me today. Do they feel safe? And asking that question, that's a big one. And I think every time I coach leaders now, I think I'm going to add that in, have you asked your team if they feel safe? Because that's not a question we would generally ask in ops, Right. So thank you for that. All right. So that wraps up another show, The Positive Effect. Go ahead and subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and we'll see you on another show next week. Awesome.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.